Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf Lamed Zayin contains one Mishnah. From the beginning of the Daf until the Mishnah concludes the Gemara's discussion of the Vidoy, which was said by the Kohen Gadol. The Gemara will discuss the exact text of the Vidoy and where we learn two words that are used and why those words are not necessarily used in other places. Then the Mishnah tells us about the Kohen Gadol's next steps, where he went to the two goats and the lots that were drawn as to which one would be La'azazel and which one would be a carbon to Hashem. The Mishnah will describe the lots themselves, and that'll take the Mishnah itself to discuss other things which people donated to the Beis Hamikdash. The Gemara will get into the details of where the goats stood, whose opinion it is that the Mishnah fits with based on where the goats stood, and then the other things that people gave, why they gave them, and why they didn't give more. So let's begin. The Gemara had said earlier that when the Kohen Gadol said Vido, he began with the phrase Ana Hashem. First of all, the Gemara says, how do you know to use the word Ana? The Gemara says, well, in the Psukim describing the Vidoy, it's called a kapara. It says it should be mechaper. So we link it to another pasuk that describes kapara, and that is when Moshe Rabbeinu was being mispal for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be mechaper, to atone for Klal Yisrael's sin at the Chet Egel. And there Moshe Rabbeinu said the word Ana. He said Ana chata amazeh. So we learn from there you're supposed to say Ana by that kapara. You're also supposed to say Ana by this kapara of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. So Gemara says, okay, how do you know to say the name of Hashem? It doesn't say there the name of Hashem. The Gemara says that we learn from the kapar that says by Egla Harufa. In the service of the Egla Harufa, where the elders of the village come to the site of a person who was killed, we don't know who killed him, and we try to atone for the fact that we didn't take responsibility. So we say Kapar Lam Chiso Asher Podisa Hashem. We say there Hashem's name. We say, first of all, it says Kaper, and therefore it's linked to this Kapara here. And second of all, it says Hashem, so just like it says Hashem there, we use the Hashem's name over here. Somebody says, okay, we understand why the Kohen Gadol's Vido is learned out of those two places. The question is, why aren't they learned from each other? So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say Hashem. He couldn't learn from Egla Rufa. He was first. He said whatever he said. There isn't anything for him to learn from Egla Rufa. But why, in the Egla Rufa procedure, do we not learn from Moshe Rabbeinu? We all have the word Kaper, right? The word Kaper exists in all three places. So based on the link of Kaper to Kaper, we should learn from Moshe Rabbeinu's Vidoy to say Ana, and in the case of Egla Rufa, we should also say Ana. So the concludes that is a kasha. Gemara doesn't resolve that. Okay, next, the previous Mishnah had told us that after everybody hears the Kohen Gadol say the name of Hashem, everybody answers Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Leilam V'ed. The Gemara wants to know what's the source for that. The Gemara quotes two psukim in a brisa. Brisa says there is a pasuk says Ki Shem Hashem Ekra Havogadol Elokeinu. Moshe said to Klal Yisrael when he said this, whenever the Hashem's name is mentioned, you should bring greatness to Hashem. So when the Kohen Gadol mentions Hashem's name, we say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Leilam V'ed. You will give us the second source from the pasuk Zeicher Tzadik Levracha. When you mention the righteous, it should be for blessing. So that is a pasuk in Mishlei. So the Gemara says that from there we see when you mention Tzadik Shel Olam, you mention that refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everybody should give blessing and should say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Leilam V'ed. Okay, now we get to the Mishnah. And the Mishnah moves on to the next steps. After finishing with his par, with his cow, the Kohen Gadol now goes to the two goats that were set up. Where were they? So the Gemara says they were standing all the way on the east side of the Azara, next to the door, but north of the Mizbeach. So they were east-northeast of the Mizbeach. If you drew a line running east to west on the northern edge of the Mizbeach, it would be just north of that, and all the way on the eastern side. So, over there was standing already, holding the two goats prepared, there was the Skan, the assistant Kohen Gadol, and the head of the family of Kohanim that would have served that day had it not been Yom Kippur. Every day had a family which was responsible to serve her that day. Each family had its Rosh Beis Av, so they were both standing there, and they flanked the Kohen. The Skan, the assistant, stood on his right, and the Beis Av, the Rosh Beis Av, stood on his left. Now, what would he do? There was a box there with two lots in it. Two things with the words written on it, La Hashem and La Azazel. What were the lots made out of? So Gemara says in the old days they were made out of a piece of wood, piece of barosh, a type of wood, And then the Kohen Gadol Yeshua ben Gamla donated pieces of gold that they should be made out of gold, and the Mishnah says the Chachamim praised him for that. Now the Mishnah lists a number of other people who donated things that the Chachamim praised them for. There's a Kohen Gadol named Ben Katin. He made 12 faucets on the kior instead of the previous arrangement, which had only 2. The Gemara will explain why. He also made a special type of device which could lower the kior into a well. That way the kior's water, which had kedusha because it was in a klisharis, would not become puzzle when it was left overnight. We know anything that has kedusha, anything which was mekadesh in a klisharis, becomes puzzle if it's left overnight. But by putting this back in the well, it was connected to the water that was there that was not mekadesh, and therefore it became regular water and it did not become puzzle overnight. Next, the Mishnah says, King Munbaz made all the handles of Kalim in the Beis Hamikdash. He made them out of gold, the ones for Yom Kippur specifically. His mother, who was called Heleni Amalka, Queen Heleni, she made a special candelabra which hung over the entrance to the Heichal, and she also made a special board that had the Parsha Sota written on it. The Sota procedure involves copying a certain Parsha from the Torah, which describes what to write, onto a parchment, and that was erased into the water. So instead of having a Sefer Torah there to copy from, she made a special gold plate, and that's what they would use to copy all those things. And the last thing the Mishnah mentions is Nicanor, who was a person who made 2 copper doors and brought them to the Beis Hamikdash. The Mishnah says that a miracle happened to his doors, and these were all mentioned for praise. The Chachamim praised them for all the things that they gave to the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, now the Gemara begins, and the Gemara discusses where were these 2 goats placed specifically. So we said they have to be north of the Mizbeach. That indicates that the Mizbeach itself was not in the northern part of the Azar. The Azar was split into 2 halves, the northern half and the southern half. All Kachim activities had to be put in what was called the northern half. The question is, where was the Mizbeach itself? Was that sticking into the northern half? If it was, then anything which had to be done in the north could be flanking the Beis Hamikdash. It could be on its east or on its west, as long as it's north of the dividing line. If, however, the Mizbeach was fully in the south of the mid line, then anything had to be north of the Mizbeach. Any Kachim activities had to be north of the Mizbeach. There was no part of the Mizbeach on its east or west, which is part of the northern half of the Azar. This Mishnah clearly said that these 2 seir have to be put north of the Mizbeach, northeast, but definitely north. It couldn't be due east. That implies that the Mizbeach itself was not sticking into the northern half of the Azara. Had it been, these 2 goats could be due east of the Mizbeach, just in the northern half, which was also due east. So this indicates that this Mishnah must be the opinion that holds that the Mizbeach was fully in the southern half. Who is that? So the Gemara says that's Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. The Gemara says it's a problem because that contradicts our previous Mishnah. Our previous Mishnah said that the cow of the Kohen Gadol was due west of the Mizbeach. It was in the northern half of the Mizbeach, but it was due west. So that doesn't fit with Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. That, we said, was Rabbi Elazar ben Reb Shimon. So it doesn't fit. So who is it? The previous Mishnah and this Mishnah are different opinions as to where the Mizbeach was actually located? So the Gemara says no, it was all Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Why did the previous Mishnah say that the cow was west of the Mizbeach? Was between, it didn't say west, it said between the Mizbeach and the Ulam. The Ulam is to the west of the Mizbeach. Gemara says it didn't mean that it was due west, it meant it was in the western zone. It was actually north of the Mizbeach, but it was westward of the Mizbeach. That was the point, and really it was a bit north because the Mizbeach itself was in the southern half of the Azar, so it had to be north of the wall of the Mizbeach itself. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to the next thing we had seen. Our Mishnah said that the Kohen Gadol is flanked by his assistant on his right, and the Rosh Beis Av on his left. So Gemara says this contradicts the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that you're not allowed to walk on your Rebbe's right side. Somebody who walks on the right of his Rebbe is a boor. He's a fool. Doesn't know the ways of the world. Yet we see that the Skan stood on the right of the Kohen Gadol. Not only that, we have another brisa that says when 3 people are walking along the way, the Rebbe should be in the middle. That means that somebody is standing on his right. And it says of the other 2, the greater one should be on the right and the lesser one should be on the left. Not only that, but when the Malchei Shares came to visit Avram Avinu, a third support you could have the Rebbe Rebbe in the middle and somebody on his right, because Michal was the leader. Michal stood in the middle, and Gavriel stood on the right, and Rafal stood on the left. So if Gavriel, the Malach Gavriel, stood to the right of Michal, you see you're allowed to stand to the right of your Rebbe. So it's a kash on Rabbi. So the Gemara says, no, in all these situations, they weren't standing directly to the right of the Rebbe, they were standing behind the Rebbe. So you're not allowed to walk behind your Rebbe. You have a brayso that says somebody who walks behind his Rebbe is a bor, and somebody who walks in front of his Rebbe is a... No, somebody walks in front of his Rebbe, somebody walks next to his Rebbe is a bor, and somebody walks behind him is a gas ruach, he's a balgaiva, it's inflated ego. Where it says no, so it's behind and off to the side, not directly, but angled. So it's a bit behind and a bit to the side. That way nobody's walking on his right, and nobody's walking directly behind him. We solve both situations. And that's what happened in all these cases here. Okay, the Gemara now moves on to discuss the actual lots that were drawn to determine which goat was going to be the carbon and which goat was going to go to Azazel. So the Gemara quotes a brayso. The brayso says, Aaron puts on each goat goyra lois. That's what the pasuk says. Aaron puts goyra lois on each goat. The brayso says you can make those lots out of anything. How do you know that? Because let's look at the wording here. It says goyra lois, plural goyra lois. That would sound like two of each. You have two la Hashem and two la Zazel, and you put two on each of the goats. The Gemara says that can't be, because it says afterwards goyra echad Hashem, goyra echad la Zazel. It says goyra. That means there's only one put on each of them. Okay, now we know that there's only one, that means the Gemara says first that there's only one girl that says on it La Hashem, and only one girl that says on it La Zazel. So the Gemara says maybe I should take both and put it on one goat, then take both, put it on the other goat. How are you going to know which one to use for which? Rashi says you get to pick on your own. But maybe it says, the problem is it says Gairalois. It says you should put two Gairalois on the goats. That sounds like two on each. Now I already know that there's only one Gairal of each, because it says Gairol. But what am I going to do with the fact that it says to put two? So the Gemara says no. You only put one on each. It says Gairol Echad on this, Gairol Echad on that. So why does it say Gairol is plural? That's to teach me that they have to be the same. You can't have one be of wood and one be of gold or some other material. You can't have one be bigger, one be smaller. Obviously, they have to match. So Gemara says, all right, now you told me that they're allowed to be made of any material. Gemara says, why would I think that? Why would I think there's a limitation to what materials it could be made of? Gemara says, simple, because you have something that has the Shem Hashem on it, you would think that it has to be the same as the tzitz. The tzitz had the Shem Hashem on it, and the tzitz had to be made out of gold. So you would think that the one that had the Shem Hashem on it has to be made out of gold, and since they have to be the same, the other one also has to be made out of gold. Therefore, the Torah teaches me, no, Gairalois can be made out of anything. It also says Gairol. The Brisa says it uses the word Gairol twice as an inclusion. It can be made out of olive wood, it can be made out of boxwood, any type of wood, and it can be made out of gold if you want. You can make it out of anything. Okay, now the Gemara turns to the list of people who donated things in the Beis HaMikdash. So the first one there on the list after the Gairolois was Ben Katin. He made 12 spouts on the kiyars. So the Gemara says, what is the function of that? The Gemara says that was for the 12 kahanim who need to wash their hands for the avoda of the carbon tumbin. Now there are 13 kahanim involved. Just one is doing shchita. Shchita doesn't require kohen, and therefore it doesn't require hand washing. So therefore you had 12 that had to wash their hands, and in order that they should all be able to wash their hands and feet at the same time, he made 12 faucets. So the Gemara says, in the old days when there were only two, the Kohanim on their way in would have to wash their hands. They could wash their hands from the top faucet because the water level was high. On the way out, they would have to wash their hands already from the bottom faucet, their hands and feet from the bottom faucet, because the water level had dropped and it didn't reach to the top faucet anymore. Now another thing that Ben Katin made was this machine that lowered this device that lowered the kiyar into the well. The Gemara says, what was it? The Gemara describes it as a large wheel where the ropes were wrapped around it. When you turn the wheel, it would draw the ropes upward, and that would draw the kiyar out. And when you turn the wheel the other way, it would lower the kiyar into the well, functioning as a pulley system to some extent. Okay, now the Gemara goes further. The Gemara says that Munbaz made the handles of the kalim used on Yom Kippur out of gold. The Gemara says, why just the handles? If he was feeling generous, let him make all the kalim out of gold. So Abba says this is referring to the knives. You can't make a knife out of gold. The gold is too soft to cut. So Gemara says that can't be, because we have a brayso that says he made the kalim, their bases, their handles, and the knives of Yom Kippur out of gold. So you see that he did other things besides the knives. Abai says, okay, those other things referring to hatchets and sickles and all kinds of other devices, besides for the Yom Kippur knives, which he made only the handles out of gold. And again, it says the handles of the Yom Kippur knives. It doesn't say he made the knives themselves. So he made the bases and the handles of all these kalim, and the Gemara says it's not just knives. Abai says it was only cutting devices, and therefore you couldn't make the entire thing out of gold. Only the handle could he make out of gold. Next, the Mishnah says that Heleni made a special candelabra or some light-giving device which hung above the door of the Heichel. Gemara quotes a brayso that says that when the sun would shine, it would strike this object and would sparkle. It would send light sparkling all over the place, and everybody would know that it is time to say Kriya Shema in the morning. So Gemara says, who benefited from that? The people in the Beis Hamikdash did not say Kriya Shema in the time when the sun rose and hit. They didn't say it in the right time. Now, they said it within Zman Kriya Shema, but they didn't say it at the most chatchila moment of sunrise. They didn't say it at Zricha. They didn't say it like Vasikin. How do you know that? Because the brayso says that the Kohanim would say it too late because they couldn't say it until after they finished the avodah of the Karban Talmud. And the Yisraelim, whose job it was who were on a shift to represent Klal Yisrael, they said it too early because they wanted to say it before the avodah began. So everybody said it, again, within the time, but not in that exact moment. So nobody needed to know when it was the exact moment of sunrise when the sun would hit that candelabra. So the Gemara answers, there were other people. Yerushalayimers came to watch the avodah. There were other people there, and they would say Shema at the time when the candelabra would begin to sparkle. All right, and the next thing that's mentioned is that she made a plate of gold with the Parsha of Sot engraved in it. So the Gemara says, so you learn from here that you're allowed to write over a Parsha and Chumash. We considered in other places that it's possible you're only allowed to write over the entire Torah at once. You're not allowed to have just a piece of it, lest people make mistakes and assume this is the whole thing. So here we see you're allowed to. You're allowed to just make over one Parsha. You're allowed to write over. You're also allowed to do it then for other things. Let's say you want to teach it to a child or something. You're allowed to write just a piece of it. So this is not necessarily. It could be that it wasn't the whole thing written. It was just the first letter of each word. And that was enough to remind the Kohen who was writing out the Parsha what word he needs to write. So Gemara says that can't be. We have a brayso that says that when the Kohen was writing the Parsha for the Sota, it says he would look at the plate and he would write Masha Kosev B'Tavla. He would write what's written on the board. So Gemara says no, maybe you have to change the version a little. It's not that he wrote what was written on the board because that was only the first letter of each word, but he wrote Kim Masha Kosev B'Tavla as was indicated by the board. So Gemara says no good. I have another brayso that says he would write Masha Kosev B'Tavla, Uma Kosev B'Tavla, and he would write what it says on the board and what was written there. It says, and it starts quoting Psukim fully. Im Shachavi Shaisach, if a man lay with you, and then it says Im Lo Shachav, Im Satis, if you turned away from your husband, Im Lo Satis, all these things. So Gemara says no, okay, so it had those Psukim, but the rest were just in letters. It started off each phrase with the first words as it's written here, but the rest of it were just letters, and therefore this does not prove that you're allowed to write an entire parsha if it's not part of the entire Sefer Torah, because this here was not an entire parsha, just a couple of words here and there, and the rest were just.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.